All right, Smith. So here's Unit 7 Quiz Review Worksheet 1. And this is the review worksheet we didn't do in class, but it is assigned as homework. So it's important to go over it. And also, if you wanted to get the answers or the guide for doing this worksheet, it'll help you prepare for the quiz, which will be tomorrow. So just to go over some of those hints and tricks that I was giving us in preparation for tomorrow, some of these strategies we can use. The first is probably the most important, and that's SOHCAHTOA. Remember, whenever we get our quiz, we want to write it right on the top of the page. We want to write it just like this, because in this form it tells us which side goes over which. So if we have the opposite in hypotenuse, then opposite goes over hypotenuse for sine. And again, this is really the crux of our unit, this unit. Last chapter we said, when in doubt, proportion out. But this chapter, when in doubt, we're going to SOHCAHTOA out. And this is kind of exactly where we want to be on every problem. The second thing we talked about in class is that they're always going to ask us to solve for a side or an angle. So if they ask us to solve for an angle, we know that we're going to use the inverse. And these are always going to look something like this. Cosine of some angle, maybe we'll just call it angle x, equals some number over the other. So maybe like 12 over 15. And we know that we're solving for an angle whenever that angle is our variable. Whenever that angle is our variable. So once we do that, once we get there, we know that we're just going to do the inverse. And that inverse function on our calculator, remember, is second, and then whatever the function is. So this one happens to be cosine, so second cosine of 12 divided by 15. And that's going to give us our x, or our degree measurement. So then the other thing that they're going to ask us to solve for is the side. And now the side might seem a little bit more confusing, but it's actually very straightforward. The first thing we're going to do is set up our SOHCAHTOA, again, just like with the angle. And remember that SOHCAHTOA is what we're going to do for almost every problem. And then we're just going to times by our denominator. So we're going to get something like, I don't know, tangent of 32 is, I don't know, 12 over x. Right? 12 over x. Now, no matter what this denominator is, if it's a variable, if it's a whole number, we're going to times by that denominator. And then we're going to just solve for x. So we want to get x alone. Right? And then we're going to go to our calculator. So for this problem that I just set up, we would end up getting x equals 12 divided by the tangent of 32. And whatever x equals, we're just going to type that right into the calculator and press enter. Now let's say that x started in the numerator. We would end up getting something multiplying by each other. Now we would end up getting something like maybe 14 times, cosine of 28. And if that's the case, again, we just type it right into our calculator. And that would be our x. That would be our variable. The next thing we reminded ourselves is that the sine of one angle equals the cosine of the next. So if I had this triangle here, ABC, well, the sine of angle A is going to equal the cosine of the other acute angle, B. The opposite is also true. So the cosine of A is going to equal the sine of B. And then we talked about how large angle, the large acute angle, is opposite the large side. So if I had a triangle, I'll call this DEF because we already used A, B, and C. And I had sides 4 and 2. Well, this is the larger side. 4 is the larger acute side, leg. So E is the larger acute angle. And that's because E is opposite 4. So if they asked us to solve for the large angle, we would be solving for E. on this one. So let's look at a couple problems and start going on this worksheet.